There is a kind of strength that does not shout. It does not demand to be seen or heard or praised. It lives quietly in the way a person chooses to do what is right, even when no one is looking. Integrity. It is heavier than it seems. Like the grain of old oak wood, it runs deep, unseen, but it holds everything together. In a small town in Ohio, the morning light falls through the window of a weathered workshop. Dust floats in the air, shimmering in gold. And there, standing by a workbench covered with shavings and worn tools, is Eli Turner, a carpenter who has spent more than 40 years shaping wood and purpose with the same pair of hands. He does not talk much. He measures twice, cuts once, and believes that a man's worth is built the same way he builds his houses. Slowly, honestly, beam by beam. But one day, the weight of that belief will be tested, and in the quiet creak of old wood, Eli will learn what the true weight of integrity really is. Eli Turner was 62 years old. He had spent his whole life working with wood, not machines. His hands were rough, his back a little bent, but his eyes were still steady. The kind of eyes that had seen decades of sunrises through the same dusty window. He lived in Maple Creek, a small town tucked somewhere between Ohio's cornfields and quiet hills. People there still waved when passing by. And if you followed the smell of pine and varnish, you would find Eli's workshop, a simple wooden shed with an old sign that read, "Turner Carpentry, since 1978. Every morning, before the town was awake, Eli unlocked the door, turned on a single bulb, and began his ritual. He wiped his tools one by one, lined them neatly, and ran his fingers along the surface of unfinished oak. He listened to the grain, as if it whispered back. It was his way of praying. He believed that good work spoke for itself, that if you built something honest, people would notice. That belief had carried him through 40 years of sawdust and sweat. But it also chained him, because when the world started moving faster, Eli refused to rush. New contractors came with shiny machines and cheaper lumber. Younger workers joked that his way was old school. He smiled, but the truth stung. He wondered if integrity still had a place in a world that rewarded speed over care. And yet, every morning, Eli kept showing up. Because to him, doing less than his best felt like lying, not to others, but to himself. It happened quietly. No warning, no ceremony, just a short meeting on a gray Tuesday morning. The company was cutting costs. Too many new workers, not enough projects, and Eli Turner, after 40 years of loyal work, was told it was time to retire. He nodded, polite as always. The young manager spoke fast, like reading a script. Something about appreciation, contribution, and moving forward. Words that sounded polite, but felt empty. Before Eli could leave, the manager added, "There's one last house we'd like you to finish. It's for an important client. Consider it your final project." Eli accepted, though something inside him sank. He wanted to feel honored, but all he felt was used. For the first time in his life, his hands trembled when he picked up his tools. The house stood on the edge of town, overlooking a quiet lake. Beautiful, expensive, modern. The kind of home he had never built before. At first, Eli worked as he always did. Slow, careful, precise. But days passed, and bitterness began to creep in like sawdust under the skin. He looked at the blueprints and sighed. "What does it matter?" he whispered. He started skipping measurements. A crooked beam here, a rushed coat of paint there. He hammered nails without checking their line. The wood splintered. He left it that way. Paint dripped and dried unevenly. He told himself no one would notice. Each mistake carried a whisper of guilt, but he silenced it. He told himself he deserved to be done, He told himself no one cared anymore. He told himself integrity was a young man's game. But late at night, when the world was still, Eli would walk through the half-built house and hear the echo of his own footsteps, and it felt hollow, not because of the empty walls, but because something inside him had cracked too. He stood in the middle of the unfinished room, the smell of wet paint in the air, and whispered to himself, "It doesn't matter anymore." But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't true. Weeks later, the house was finished. The paint had dried. The floors shone beneath the late afternoon light. But Eli Turner felt nothing. No pride, no peace, just a quiet ache, deep and dull, like the sound of a nail being driven too far. He walked slowly through the rooms. Each step echoed against bare walls, hollow and cold. The sunlight that slipped through the dusty windows didn't warm the air. It only reminded him of what was missing. He had built dozens of homes in his life, yet none had ever felt this empty. He stopped in the center of the living room, looking around at what should have been his best work. Instead, all he could see were shortcuts, crooked lines, uneven edges, marks of a man who had stopped caring. Eli sat down on the wooden floor, his tools scattered nearby. He whispered, his voice rough and dry, "I spent my life building homes. Yet I've just built something I can't live in." For a long moment, there was only silence. A faint creak of wood, the wind brushing against the window frame. On the table, his old hammer rested, its handle worn smooth from years of work. It was more than a tool. It was a witness. And now, it lay still, catching the last thin ray of daylight as the sun disappeared behind the trees. Eli stared at it until the light faded completely. He felt the weight of time pressing down, the years he could never reclaim, the pride he had traded for bitterness. When darkness finally filled the room, he stood up and turned off the single bulb hanging above him. The next morning, his phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, cheerful even. "Mr. Turner," the man said, "the new owner would like to meet you tomorrow, to thank you personally." Eli didn't answer right away. He looked at the empty house one more time, and for the first time in years, he didn't know whether to feel fear or shame. The next morning, Eli Turner walked into the company office, the same place he had entered for decades. But today, the air felt heavier. People nodded politely, but no one met his eyes for long. It was the kind of silence that hides a surprise you're not sure is good or bad. His old manager stood by the window, holding a small brown envelope. "Eli," he said softly, "before you go, there's something we'd like to give you." He handed the envelope to Eli, then stepped back, almost awkwardly. Eli opened it slowly. Inside was a single brass key, smooth and shining under the morning light. He frowned, confused. The manager smiled, his voice gentle. "This house is yours?" For a moment, Eli didn't understand. The room went still, like the air had forgotten how to move. He looked down at the key resting in his palm. The same house he had rushed through. The same walls he had built carelessly. And suddenly, every corner he had cut came flooding back. Every crooked beam, every cheap nail, every careless stroke of paint. He could almost see them again, like ghosts of his own choices. His hands trembled. The key slipped slightly between his fingers, catching the light, the same light that had once fallen across his workbench. It wasn't just guilt he felt. It was something deeper, a realization that he hadn't betrayed his company or the client. He had betrayed himself. The weight of that truth was heavier than any tool he had ever lifted. He closed his fingers around the key, feeling its edges press into his skin. For the first time in years, Eli didn't feel the weight of wood or iron. He felt the weight of integrity. He nodded quietly, unable to speak, and walked out of the office with the key still warm in his hand. Outside, the morning light was bright and kind, but he couldn't lift his eyes to meet it. For weeks, Eli Turner stayed silent. He didn't visit the workshop. He didn't answer the phone. The house key sat on his kitchen table, catching the morning light each day, a quiet reminder of the man he used to be, and the man he still wanted to find again. Neighbors saw him sometimes, sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at nothing in particular. He had built homes for others all his life, yet now he couldn't bring himself to walk into the one that was his. Then one morning, before dawn, something changed. Maybe it was the sound of the birds, or the way the sky turned soft and gold at the edges. Eli stood up, walked to his shed, and picked up his old hammer, the same one that had been with him since his first job. It felt heavy but familiar, like shaking hands with an old friend. He drove to the house, parked quietly, and opened the door to the place he had built without heart. The air was still thick with the smell of paint. He took a slow breath, then ran his hand along the uneven wall. "It's time to make this right," he whispered. From that day on, Eli worked alone. He replaced crooked beams. He sanded rough edges until they were smooth again. He took out rusty nails and drove in new ones, straight and true. Each swing of the hammer echoed through the empty rooms like a prayer, steady, humble, and full of intent. Some days his back ached, some nights his hands bled. But he didn't stop, because this time every nail meant something. Every stroke of paint carried an apology, not to anyone else, but to himself. Neighbors began to notice. They'd see the old man working from sunrise to dusk, his movements slow but sure. Children riding their bikes would stop by the fence, whispering, "He's fixing it." And the adults would nod quietly, understanding that he wasn't just fixing a house. He was rebuilding a man. Weeks passed. The house began to change. The sunlight that once felt harsh now streamed softly through clean windows, filling each room with a gentle glow. The scent of pine replaced the smell of dust and regret. And for the first time in months, Eli smiled while he worked. One morning, as he adjusted a newly painted window frame, the first rays of light broke through and fell across his face. He paused, eyes closed, letting the warmth touch him. It wasn't just sunlight. It was forgiveness. By late summer, the house stood solid and still, simple, but beautiful. Not perfect, but honest. And that was enough. Eli stepped back, wiping his hands on his apron. He looked at the walls he had rebuilt, at the doors that finally fit their frames, and felt something lift inside him. He walked up to the front porch, ran his hand across the smooth grain of the new railing, and whispered, This feels right." For a moment, he stood there, eyes soft, watching the golden light spill across the floor he had once ruined. He smiled, a quiet, tired smile, the kind a man wears when he's finally made peace with himself. And when he turned to leave, the morning wind moved gently through the open door, carrying the smell of pine, paint, and redemption. As the house stood in the warm light of evening, Eli Turner's story became more than a carpenter's tale. It became a quiet reminder that the things we build with our hands will one day fade, but the things we build with our choices will outlast us. First, integrity is doing what is right, even when no one sees. It is not about reputation or reward. It is the quiet promise you make to yourself when no one is watching. Second, shortcuts may save time, but they always steal peace. Every time you rush what deserves patience, a piece of you is left unfinished too. Third, the work you build reflects who you are. A wall may stand straight, but if built without care, it will never hold meaning. The same is true for the way we live. Fourth, fixing mistakes takes more courage than making them. Anyone can start, but it takes a strong heart to admit, I was wrong, and begin again. Fifth, you can rebuild your life, plank by plank, day by day, if you choose to begin again. Redemption is not found in words, but in quiet, consistent effort. Sixth, no one can undo the past, but everyone can decide what to do next. And sometimes, that one decision changes everything. Seventh, in the end, integrity is not about being perfect. It is about being honest, with your work, with others, with yourself. As the sun set behind the repaired house, the walls seemed to glow softly, like they were breathing again. Eli hung his tools neatly on the wall, not as weapons of labor, but as symbols of peace. The air smelled of pine and evening rain. The house was still. And for the first time in a long while, Eli didn't just stand in a building. He stood in something he could finally call home. In the end, we are all builders. Some build houses, some build careers. But every one of us is building something. A life, a heart, a legacy. The tools may look different, but the work is the same. We shape with every choice, we measure with every word, and we hold it all together with something invisible. Integrity. Eli Turner's story is not just about wood and nails. It is about every person who has ever looked at what they've made and realized they could have done better. It is about the courage to start again. You are not the house you built carelessly. You are the one who chose to rebuild. And that choice, quiet, humble, unseen, is what defines you far more than any mistake ever could. So if this story touched you, share it. Because somewhere out there, someone is standing before the ruins of their own effort, wondering if it is too late to begin again. Let them know it isn't. Let them know it never is. And as the sun sets over Maple Creek, Eli walks away from the house, not as a man who lost time, but as one who finally found peace.